It's now cliche to say that COVID-19 has disrupted the workplace. And it's often repeated that we don't know how this pandemic will change the way of working going forward. Now, organizations have done a yeoman's job reacting to the crisis. Challenge is now long-term planning. We don't know how or when this crisis will end, so we have to be making plans for continuing to work in the current condition and for how this experience will impact organizations and employees going forward. Now, individual employees have also reacted and shifted our work style. But after the adrenaline rush ended, we started to become more reflective. We began to think about how the aspects of our work, what aspects of our work conditions that we want to keep, and those aspects of our work conditions that we don't want to keep. Now, there are lots of aspects of post-pandemic workplace that we have to examine and we have to plan for. But today I've been asked to talk about how work-life balance will look for individual employees. I'm going to provide you some highlights of my conversations and surveys of employees just like you and your team members. And I'll share how this experience, I think, will impact the wants, the desires, and needs of employees going forward. And I hope to provide you some strategies for your organization to rethink what you, your business, and your people need in order to thrive going forward. My name is Jonathan Shaver, and I'm the owner of Envision Partners. I've been an associate member of ASTA for 8 years. At Envision Partners, we support organizations with their talent development needs, from identifying what future needs will be, to building the skills of individual contributors, and building the bench strength through first-time leaders, middle management, and executives. Today, I'm going to share what I see going on in general and what I've learned through my own surveys, focus group conversations, and about how employees feel and the approaches that are being tried. However, it's critical that you know what's going on in your own organization, the conditions in your company that can and should be modified to best support you and your employees. You should know what you need. What works for some employees may not work for others. And it's important to figure out and to know what your individual values and business needs will be going forward. To support this effort, at the end of the presentation, I'm going to provide you a link with the questions that I've used for collecting feedback. And I really suggest that you modify them to fit your situation and your needs. Now, conversations about new ways of working and a better work-life balance have been taking place for some time. And for the most part, it's been a lot of talk. There wasn't really a lot of change. Now, the fact that these new ways of working came about as a result of crisis did indeed make it easier to change. Both unfortunately and fortunately, it was not a guided change. Fortunately, because some organizations, well, they would have taken a very long time to make any changes to the ways of working. Unfortunately, because new ways of working are maybe not what you would have developed for your company or for your team. So if the reactionary changes work against your future success, then they shouldn't continue. But if they're not reducing your effectiveness, the question is, why go back? Now, no one size fits an organization or fits an individual employee. So I'm going to give you what I'm learning, but you have to learn for yourselves what you and your organization require, what your employees require, and together find solutions that bring these two things together. So let's use this time, step back, and re-examine work-life balance after 2020. Where work is getting done has been the most noticeable change to the ways of working caused by the pandemic. Prior to the pandemic, nationally, 7 to 15% of work was being done from home. The high range includes work being done from coffee shops or co-working locations. I think the best word here is remote work. At one point during the pandemic, 50% of work being done was being done remotely. Currently, according to Upworks, a national company that provides platforms to support remote freelance workers, that number of remote workers and remote work is at 30%. According to a separate survey by Lawless Research, 80% of respondents said that the remote working experience for them is good or excellent. Only 4% of those surveyed indicated a below average experience. In that same survey, 43% said that productivity has increased. A report by McKinsey put that number of 28%, indicating increased productivity. Altogether, remote work is up. Productivity is not negatively impacted. Now, I recognize that the distribution of remote work is not equal. Most remote workers are knowledge or office jobs, finance, sales and marketing, management, or software or analytics. However, if we break down an individual role, we can ask ourselves what aspects of a given role can be done without coming into the office or to a central gathering place. Research previously suggested that 35% of all roles could be done completely or partially remotely. Based on the ability of employees and organizations and technology improvements, it's now calculated that over 50% of jobs can be done completely or partially remotely. Almost all jobs in our industry have some sort of office or administrative or meeting work. For example, Monday morning meetings, project planning might take place at the office, whereas execution on those plans can take place in any location. We can begin to scrutinize the choices to have co-located group meetings. What needs to be done in person versus email, phone, or video? There's a lot of learning about what can and cannot be done remotely. There are a few ramifications of remote work that you may not yet have considered. Given the reduced requirement to be in the central office all or any of the time, there will be a reduced geographic requirement to live near the office. Some roles might let an employee live in another country. Some roles may allow them to live an hour or two from the office, permitting weekly or occasional check-ins. Such location flexibility leads to a greater pool of available talent. Location flexibility also allows for lifestyle of living in a larger town or city and still working for a company in a small town. This flexibility increases the likelihood of both spouses finding full employment. However, the reverse is also true. Location flexibility also means your locally trapped employees don't have to work for you because there are no other choices. Your best employees can choose to live in the small town where you're located and work for a company that's located somewhere else. Up to 11% of employees surveyed by Upwork are planning to move as a result of COVID-19. Across all roles, it's expected the time worked in main or satellite offices will decrease by 12 and 9% respectively. With fewer employees in the office at the same time, this could lead to a reduced need for office space and therefore reduced real estate costs. Fixed real estate costs represent 10 to 20% of the personnel-driven expenditures. Secondarily, if the only purpose to come into work is to collaborate, we might have to reconfigure our offices to support more collaboration and actually eliminate spaces for individual contributor work. Through my surveys, I've had a few unexpected findings. And one of them is that liberated from commutes, employees have found additional ways to use their time. For some, this has been family time or Netflix. For others, a new hobby or puzzles. For an increasing number, it's learning. This was not an expected find in my survey, but it is supported by a national survey indicating that 24% of employees are taking courses not required or recommended by their employer. The increase in learning could be because this is a good use of redistributed time. Could also be because of the volatility in the workplace and the fear of job loss. Overall, independent learning has become something that employees are doing more of, enjoying, and will be expecting to be able to do as they continue coming back to work as normal. So asking yourself, with all of the learning opportunities out there, one expressed desire is for companies to provide direction in the wide learning world, especially as it relates to the professional development plan. Learning means that employees are upskilling and reskilling. Are you prepared to help them to use their new skills in your organization before they can take them somewhere else? Are you prepared to give them this opportunity to keep growing and developing those skills when they resume the full office day? How would reading a book during work hours be perceived in your workplace? Here was another early surprise I first learned about in March. Because upper management was traveling less, they had more time to check in. In some cases, the amount of checking in with reports was paramount to micromanaging. This trend seemed to have calmed down as managers found other ways to use their time. But this did tell team members that their supervisors and upper management were more available for check-ins, updates, and clarifications. And on a positive note, there have been fewer canceled one-on-ones. These monthly or weekly updates that are invariably rescheduled are now held on a regular basis. The availability of upper management for impromptu guidance, updates, coaching, and mentoring is what is supposed to happen. And now team members have become accustomed to it and value this extra time and attention. What will happen when we can start traveling again? Will your organization look differently at the value of traveling any differently than they do now? Now, we've already talked about where work gets done. The corollary is to ask about when the work gets done. When work gets done is probably the largest impactor of work-life balance. For families with children, it may be impossible for them to work only during normal business hours. Very simply stated, ask yourself, when does your work require your team or your members to be on? Does it require them to be on from 9 to 5 or 7 to 3, whatever were your standard working hours previously? Could work hours be from 7 to 10 or 4 to 9, for example? The effort to reduce the number of people at the workplace at the same time has made shift work much more common. And for some organizations, that's really worked. And for balancing responsibilities at home, shift work has been invaluable for families. To explore this at your workplace, and this shift work at your workplace, let's consider the primary reasons why 2 or more people actually need to be working at the same time. Safety for dangerous work and security while working alone, or jobs that require 2 or more people to get the work done in a limited amount of time. Or we might need to get together in a group for collaborative thinking efforts. While productivity is up, creativity is down because we haven't quite figured out the new norms for remote creative work. But even for collaborative thinking efforts, meetings and updates, I think it's important to challenge whether these actually have to be done with everyone in the same room at the same time. One complaint that's always existed is poor meetings. Meetings are often held because everyone was around the office anyway. Meetings are under even more scrutiny now. The weight of evidence that to have an all hands on deck kind of meeting now lies with the convener of that meeting to prove that everyone has to be in the same room or meet at the same time to get the desired outcomes. Improved meeting quality would actually be a very good outcome of this pandemic. Major watch out of changing the designated work time is that we also change the designated not work time. Here are 2 trends from a global study of 3 million people by Harvard Business Review. As you can probably feel in your own work life, you're having more meetings since the start of the lockdown. In this study, the meetings were actually, on average, 12 minutes shorter. Additionally, there's been an increase in total emails sent, with an increase of number of recipients as well. Together, this means that working from home has significantly increased the amount of checking in. We must decide for our own organizations if this level of checking in is actually helping or hurting productivity. Additionally, this study showed that the average workday increased by 48 minutes, almost a full hour, and that some of those extra emails were being sent outside of normal working hours. While emails after hour or longer days may not mean actual longer working hours, this data could be suggesting more personal caretaking of family during normal work hours and more work during normal non-work hours. Therefore, there's more blending of home and work. A major watch out of changing our designated work time is that we also change our designated not work time. Flexible hours should not evolve to 24/7 on, because then we are 24/7 never off. Flexibility does not mean no boundaries. The ideal is a balance of structure and flexibility. Known meetings balanced with full flexibility in between, for example. Rules of engagement are required to make this work. And don't put the burden of figuring out these rules of engagement on the shoulders of the employees. Make decisions about when employees must be on, and then leadership must support those decisions. If a 24/7 culture continues, then the productivity and happiness that was gained by working from home becomes nil. I'd like to step aside and talk about what appears to be the biggest blockade to changing the ways of working where it's possible. That is, our image of the ideal worker and models of management. Well, in agriculture, they're pretty equivalent to the nostalgic image of the red barn. It's just not the way we do it anymore. For example, the 8-hour day. We're stuck in an 8-hour work model. This hour-based work model was associated with piecework when workers were the machines who worked at a given rate and therefore productivity could be predicted and measured. Does this model really apply to most modern day employees? A focus on priorities during the crisis has helped many to realize that we can get more done in less hours, even when we're not mandated to a strict schedule. And that goes along with long hours. The unspoken and cultural meaning in most workplaces of an ideal worker is one who puts in a full day's work, who shows up on time, the one who's always busy and stays until the work is done, even if they're late because of their own inefficiency. We tend to reward those who work long hours. Culturally, we honor the work ethic. We do not necessarily and easily recognize those that are doing the right work or doing the right work more efficiently. When we can or cannot see our team members, whether they're reports or peers, we assume that they're not being productive. This tends to be a manager control issue. The lack of ability to see team members can give a sense of a lack of control over the team. Managers tend to believe that if they can see their employees, they better understand their performance. Well, they're in their seat, they must be working. For some of the data trends I've shared, it's important to dig deeper to discover what makes a situation productive while another is unproductive. A balance of working from home and at the office has always been a productivity boost. We actually know that 2 to 3 days per week is an optimum for productivity. But of course, that's when children are not at home. How do we support employees with children differently than we support those without children? And are we paying attention to those who are taking on the bulk of non-work responsibilities? Based on previous studies of the impact of family on men and on women, men are often finding detrimental workarounds and even lying to maintain the perception of keeping up at work. While women, on the other hand, are much more forthright to their employers on their needs and expectations. As an employer, how are you responding to these needs? Even though there's been great news in the last month about a vaccine, and we're even able to talk about going back to work, the post-pandemic transition will be yet another change, and we won't be calling this change back to normal. New ways of working and habits are now being formed. Which of those new ways of working are you willing to disrupt for the sake of the way we used to do things? And which ones are actually working better than the way we used to do things? Today, we talked about how this pandemic has changed our ideas about where work gets done and also about when the work gets done. And we've looked at the benefits of the extra time for learning and the benefits of the access to upper management. We've also explored just briefly the challenges that result from adjusting to this awareness that there are different ways of working and the choices that individual employees will want to make. Those wants and those needs and desires of employees were already there, but organizations were just not set up to allow for this diverse way of working. As most good crises do, this crisis helped us to realize that we're capable of more than we originally thought. And now that organizations have been forced to be able to show that they can operate in diverse ways, employees are getting used to it. Organizations are getting used to it. And moving forward, some employees, current and future, will require it, as some organizations will require it of their employees. You and your organizations are making decisions about the workplace location and workplace timing. And hopefully those are based upon the type of work that you do, the financial benefits, and because it makes your employees happier and more effective. Thank you very much for your time today and the invitation by ASTA, and I look forward to your questions and your comments.